I started off in music, then I pivoted to psychology, then cognitive science and clinical psychology and statistics. And then I went into design and research, and I led as a executive most of my years of leading design at IBM, and most recently the global vice president of UX research at IBM as well. During all of my career, I've never actually applied for a job. And when you ask, sort of what kind of challenges, surprisingly, I didn't have. So for about a third of my career, I was leading design globally for design and research for the company. We had 254 designers and researchers, full stop. I had a team of about anywhere between 15 and 30 that were on my sort of global team, my corporate team, if you will. One of the product managers was saying, Karel, you got it all wrong. Engineers need to design the product, and researchers need to just prove that it's good, and designers need to just make sure it's pretty. I said, no, that's not really. No, it had nothing to do with me. But the week after that, he was no longer with the company.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Design Head podcast. Hope you guys are liking all the episodes that are coming out recently. So today we have another amazing guest, Karel, with us. He is a pioneer in UX, and he has been in the industry for almost 4 decades, and I think he has amazing experience to share with us. So I'll get him on the stage without waiting with any time, and then we'll get on the podcast. Hey Karel, really nice to have you, and thanks for kind of taking out time for the podcast.
I'm really looking forward to it. I thank you for the invitation, Abhay.
Yeah, awesome. So let's kind of start off with a bit of your introduction, and then we can dive deeper into it.
Sounds good. How do you summarize a career that long, right? I started off in music, then I pivoted to psychology, then cognitive science and clinical psychology and statistics. And then I went into design and research, and I led as a executive most of my years of leading design at IBM, and most recently the global vice president of UX research at IBM as well. And I just retired a little bit less than a year ago.
Sounds really amazing. And I think maybe it was well-deserving retirement after so long of working, for sure. But definitely I want to start off with, because you have had a big career across different organizations, different places like IBM, academia, and even startups. And now you are kind of launching like Habits for a Better World. But what, as you said, like you started in cognitive science and like psychology, even music. Kind of looking back, what would you say in those starting years, these things, kind of how shaped you view UX and leadership now?
Really good question. I think I have, since the earliest time in my career, focused on having impact, understanding the organization that I'm in. I was initially hired, by the way. I was doing my PhD, doing research on a variety of things, but most notably looking at designing interfaces differently. And I created one enhanced user interface versus a standard one. And I did an experiment that looked at self-report improvements and galvanic skin response and heart rate, and it blew the doors off. I presented that at a conference, and somebody at IBM actually heard that conference, actually heard me afterwards, actually being interviewed in the press and on radio, and said, "You ever thought of working for IBM?" I said, "Actually, no." But I did actually just read a book that mentioned a lot about the company and what its fundamental beliefs were and the like. And I said, you know what? I think I could give that a go for a year. And that became 36.
Very interesting. I do have a follow-up around this. So like almost 35, 40 years back, when you thought of, like nowadays, if I think like I want to join a company, I can go to Google, search what's this company do. Even I can go to like AI, like ChatGPT, I can search more about the company. And also in terms of publicizing, like you mentioned radio, like maybe that was one of the biggest thing at that time, like interviewing radios. What would you say has been different now, which you see that you did then could kind of, you would have done now in a different way?
Yeah. Well, I didn't actually apply for jobs. And that's what's weird about my whole career. I was headhunted essentially for that first role. I was at the time doing, consulting. I was being requested to do based on my knowledge of statistics and research and the like. During all of my career, I've never actually applied for a job, which is a very novel experience. And it is, though, very different. I've also been mentoring and coaching people back then all the way through my career. And also I do that today as well. And it really is significantly different now, but it's also, you could think that it's easier because now, you can search for everything online and jobs are posted online and the like. But ultimately, it's also more difficult now because there's, employers can find people all over the place, as well. And so you need to differentiate yourself even more than, back then. And I also reflect on, I wrote a book about 20 years ago, and I was being interviewed on a TV show, and there was an author ahead of me that had written a book about basically demography and basically looking at, what happens at various ages. And he was making the point, don't ever as a parent say, well, you have it so easy, I had it so tough or whatever. No, it's every age is different. And it turns out that during much of my career, the job market was better than it is now, for example, for design and research. So I never say, oh, well, things were, you've got it so good, because people don't have it so good. I mean, we can maybe get into some advice later on with regard to focusing on making sure that you do what you can to get the kind of job that you want. But it is definitely over the last 2 years, it's been 3 years actually, it's been, much harder.
I think I agree. I think I do remember from your workshop at Blend that you did mention a lot of things, how people can pivot or like what UX maybe looks like in the future. And we'll definitely talk about a bit more. Let's talk about but your journey in terms of IBM, like working there for so long, from like 1990s to like recently. Like, what would you say? Like, you led like design thinking initiatives and a bunch of stuff. You would have worked at amazing projects that everybody would have heard of. What would you say were your biggest challenges trying to grow UX when technically UX maybe just got introduced or was not even a thing?
Yeah, I think so. For about a third of my career, I was leading design globally for design and research for the company. We had 254 designers and researchers, full stop. I had a team of about anywhere between 15 and 30 that were on my sort of global team, my corporate team, if you will. And that was like a startup inside the company. So I had about a quarter of my funding was from corporate, but 3/4 of that funding, I needed to go around the whole company and tin cup it is what I called it at the time. That meant that I needed to do the stuff that the company wanted, right? Inside. So it was like an internal startup. And that kept me honest to make sure that we're focused constantly on providing the appropriate impact, really making sure that everything that my team did and what we delivered was serving the needs. And during that time, every year I would worry about, did I make enough money for the, internally for the people that depended on me? There were whole families that would depend on this money. But each year we increased the budget about 10% each year. So I never really needed to worry. But I was also never really required to do any of the things the rest of the company needed to do. Like when HR said we were going to do a layoff or whatever, I wasn't affected because I was an internal, startup, if you will. I had my own funding. The last quarter or so of my career, actually starting in 2013, we had a new CEO, the person of Ginni Rometty, and she came in and really understood the challenges that users and clients had, more so than any of the previous CEOs. If any of the previous CEOs said anything about design, I typically had written it. And so you know that it's not really in their DNA that they were thinking that way. But she really did. And the short version of the story, there's probably a much longer version as well, I basically was in a talk of hers, like on the second day of the job, on the job as a CEO. And she talked about how important it was going to be that we focus on the client experience. And that was going to be a key part of her tenure as CEO. And I followed up with the appropriate executive saying, hey, you know what? This is our moment. We really need to be doing this. And so I also made the case for a guy that had been acquired. His company had been acquired by IBM some 3 years prior to that. His name was Phil Gilbert, who was amazing. He was like a force of nature. And I thought, okay, you know what? I made the case, and then he had further conversations as well for him to really be the general manager of design. And now I reported to him. And we then talked about how would we really deliver on the ask that we were given by the CEO, which is basically to develop a culture of design and design thinking across the whole company. And so he focused largely, and most of the staff that we had at the time was focused on the product side of IBM. And I took 1 year and then another year to work with each of the other parts of the company. He worked on the software part. I worked on the hardware part. I worked on the consulting part of the business, which is like half of IBM. I also worked with the sales organization, for example. So really activating the whole company with this form of design thinking that we called enterprise design thinking. And when you ask, sort of what kind of challenges, surprisingly, I didn't have hardly any. There was one. So what I would do is I'd fly around the world, go to a location like a lab of ours, and I would do like a town hall presentation about the new sort of era of design at IBM and be all excited about this new direction they were going and that kind of thing, kind of a Steve Jobs type presentation. And everybody would be really pumped about doing that. And then I'd also make sure that I met with the designers, obviously, in the location, but also with people that would have a problem with what it is that I was saying. I wanted to meet directly with them. And so I also had roundtables with, product managers and executives responsible for products. And there was one roundtable that I had, and it was literally only the one. It actually happened in Canada. Most of my stuff was all around the world. And it happened in Ottawa, where one of the product managers was saying, Karel, you got it all wrong. Engineers need to design the product, and researchers need to just prove that it's good, and designers need to just make sure it's pretty. I said, no, that's not really. No, it had nothing to do with me. But the week after that, he was no longer with the company. So there was really a really strong sense that we were on this whole transformation together. And I found it really informative and really heartening, quite frankly, when I would come across somebody that I didn't know at all. They didn't know who I was, for example. And they would just make an equivalency, like using as an example, like one of the things that we talk about in our enterprise design thinking approach is this notion of hills, which is basically who is going to be able to do what with what wow experience, basically the way to articulate the value that we're going to be providing for a particular release, for example. And one of the guys that I was a country manager for, meaning it didn't directly report to me for product work, but I was his HR manager, basically. And this executive that was his business direction manager was saying to me, maybe we should use for the business objectives for our employees, we should use these hills. Have the employee articulate like 3 hills that they're going to do and how they're going to do it in such an amazing way. And I thought that is when you've embedded it in the culture, when people can use it as examples for things that have nothing to do really with the creation of products and the like as well. So that really was that major transformation. That's when we took the 254 designers and researchers to 3,000 in just a few years, and basically also did an onboarding boot camp that for 3 months. We had everybody that was hired into the company would go to Austin, Texas for 3 months. And I was quoted in the press in England as referring to that being the missing semester of university or design school. And so I got all kinds of calls from design schools and universities saying, what are we missing? What are we missing? That you needed to do a whole 3-month module on. And that's how I also was recruited into teaching. And so ever since that time, I've been teaching at university as well.
Very interesting. I think I got a bunch of points in this, but I have a follow-up question. I think that will answer, and I think you did answer some of it. And I realized you were at a much bigger scale where there are people now, but definitely you have been there for so long and you have seen it grow. You obviously had a lot of influence and other stuff, and obviously your influence had one of the biggest impact that anybody could think of. And you had to deal with stakeholders which had that big impact as well. So I do want to ask a question around this, like how did you deal with these stakeholders who, one of the thing you referred, but who may have opposite opinions as you, as the industry is still growing, they are like, why are we putting this much effort into something we just got to know about, or we have been doing a little, why you gotta move that 250-ish person team to 3,000. How did you dealt with those stakeholders?
In several ways, actually. One was that we decided that we wanted to have a separate budget just for all the people that we were going to hire. So our little business unit, IBM Design is the name that I came up with it. Everybody would be hired into that business unit, and that wouldn't hit any of the product teams. in terms of the cost of those designers. So we would be providing designers and researchers to a product team, let's say, and that also made it such that if they didn't use the designers and researchers effectively, we could also pull them back. And we often, or no, we didn't often, occasionally, we would even just threaten that. And they say, oh, no, we want to keep them. So I think we did that for like 2 years, maybe 3 years. And then when the value was clearly demonstrated with these designers and researchers in each of the business units, then we actually made sure that they needed to now pay for the staff as well. So I think that was one area. And I think the other one is that, as I talked about in my keynote at the Blend conference as well, that a lot of companies around that time were getting into wanting to bring on designers and researchers largely with very little, justification or business value, return on investment data, right? All companies back then saw was that Apple was the most successful company in the world, was the most valuable company in the world, and they achieved that with design. That was enough for a whole lot of people to say, we need to hire a lot of designers. But the other thing that we did just a few years after that is really do the analysis of the actual impact that we were having. So we actually had Forrester Research come in and do a study with their patented method to basically assess what the speed was like in terms of getting products to market. And it turns out when you used our methods, it was twice as fast. The return on investment was 300%. And they also asked, as a separate thing, executives of companies across the US, what company comes to mind when we say design thinking? And some 52% of those executives said IBM. So we were, riding high, but we were also now demonstrating that there was business value there. And so I did a lot of work with clients. I did a lot of sessions with like a day or 2-day session with the C-suite, like the most senior team of a client organization. And the CFO would typically ask the question about the return on investment. And once we had the data from that Forrester report, I could actually just say, it's actually 300%, and you won't be slowed down. You're actually going to be going twice as fast with this thing as well. So that was another, I think, really good, effective way of making sure that we could sell them on this. But a lot of it was really just providing the actual value, actually having the designers and researchers do the work and their senior executives appreciating and actually seeing the impact that they were having on their product area.
I think that's really interesting. I think definitely data played a big role. Obviously, what you just said at the end, I think kind of summarizes it. I think actually giving the value, and definitely data will come after it no matter what, but actually giving the value to the business is definitely kind of a summary around it. Another kind of segue to this, obviously, as we talked about, you have led the kind of research there for a long while, and I do have a kind of actionable question in terms of what do you think are the critical ways companies nowadays can actually integrate these research into the design process like the most effortlessly?
Yeah, my favorite line is that researchers often think that their job is done when they finish the study and deliver the results. And that's not why they're hired. Researchers are hired to have impact on the products that they're going to influence. And so when I was leading research at IBM, I made that the case. I said, look, your job is to make sure that the research that you're doing is also communicated in such a way and in the right mechanism. So putting it right in the product roadmap, for example, and that there's a link back to the research itself and the like. That has to be part of the responsibility. And interesting, this project that I'm now running, the nonprofit, Habits for a Better World, I've got some 300 designers, researchers, and filmmakers that are part of it. But the researchers there too, I basically told them that we will build whatever the research shows that we should. And researchers just never have internalized that, right? It's always like, well, only a little bit of what it is. You can make model changes with the research that you do. But if you really take to heart that you have the power to do research that's going to dramatically change the product or system or service or whatever you're working on, you can be so much more effective. So think through to the impact that you're going to have with this, and also think about, doing the research at the speed that the team is going. This is another major problem that researchers have. It's like, well, no, but it takes this long. Actually, designers do too. It takes me this long to do this. Well, if the product is moving along and they really need to hit a release date, sorry, speed up. And one of the really effective ways of speeding up is to add a prosthesis. And I love that term. Sort of the medical term for prosthesis is some artificial way that you're going to enhance the body, right? I think that AI is that for design and research, that if you use it effectively, and I use it all day long, if you use it effectively, you can speed up and improve your work. And anybody that's not using it is going to be slowed down, and you're not going to be aligned with the rest of the product team. So those were some of the key things, and also just applying the methods that are appropriate for the time. There was some work that my teams were doing on doing some real generative research that when the product really just needed evaluative research, that they were just about to go out the door, it didn't make time. It didn't make sense at the time to spend a lot of time on the generative work. So again, think about the methods you're choosing. What impact will they have given the time that it's going to take to do that? Make sure that you're doing it in the time that you have available, and actually just choose another method if you're going to take too much longer. And then also see the results of your research all the way through to making sure that it's in the product itself.
Very interesting. And I think I kind of agree with whatever you said in terms of how people should actually use it. And I also really liked how you put it, prosthesis, in terms of how you can add something artificial technically and kind of use it to fasten your process now. And definitely, I think this is like we are at a place where there are many kind of prostheses that you can use out there, definitely to fasten your process. I do have one question around
Mhm.
this before I segue towards your what you're doing now.
Mhm.
Is it's a weird one, but I think maybe I want to ask this. So when you think about, a lot of industry folks ask any designer, what's your design process? And everybody tends to kind of answer, I follow Adapt, I follow Double Diamond, I follow this, that. What do you think is an ideal answer for what's your design process?
Well, I think it's actually design thinking. So, and not the double diamond, but the variety that IBM worked on, the enterprise design thinking one. I mean, we started off with the double diamond kind of work, and then it felt too waterfall. It didn't reinforce the whole notion of iteration. And so a couple of our members of our team came up with this whole idea of a loop, and that you're going through basically observing, reflecting, and then making, and then going back to observing again is the best way to work. And I teach this and a bunch of other things too, but the fundamentals of doing that kind of work, that you want to understand the problem that you're going to solve, and remember that 90% of all startups fail, right? Why do they fail? Because they solved a problem that nobody had. They sat there with a couple of their buddies and said that, so the reason those startups fail is because they've solved a problem that nobody had. And so what they really need to do is focus on understand it, observing, right? We had a garage in San Francisco where a whole bunch of our startups were in there. We had our own space in there as well. And I remember talking to the startups that like maybe 2 or 3 people behind glass coding away, and have a conversation with them. So what are you building? And they tell me what it is. I said, what kind of user are you doing this for? Well, anybody, so they don't really have a notion of their wide market that they want to go to. And then I'd say, okay, well, have you validated this at all? Have you got any input, with regard to this being a problem? I said, no, we will though. Once we build something, we can actually pivot. We're agile here. And I say, well, why don't we just go have a coffee, and let's go downstairs, take your computer with you. And then we just stopped people on the street and said, getting some feedback. They had the most amazing feedback. And it's that simple. You don't have to think about this thing being really, really, really complex. So understand the problem deeply, do the design thinking methods and mapping methods. And I like to say that, some 80 to 90% of design thinking is done wrong. They do innovation theater. They stand around thinking they're cool, and they might even look at having Sharpies and Post-it notes and a whiteboard wall, but they don't do the research first. So they just start making stuff up, right? And they don't make anything at the result of it either. They're just doing a workshop. Don't do that. That's the wrong way to do it, and that's given design thinking a bad name. But if instead you really do I want to understand the problem deeply, and that can be interviews, that can be observing. You can do whatever makes sense given the time and the money that you've got. And then you use these reflecting methods from design thinking, and then start to ideate and come up with some really good ideas that you want to address with the challenges, and then get feedback on that. It's that simple, right? And when I teach, board directors of companies, if they're dealing with a problem, they can use that same method, right? Teach EMBA students the same thing. They've got issues in the roles they've got in their various companies. It's just a model for how to think differently. And I joke in the class when I teach this that I've used it with my family. So I went out back by the pool, and everybody in the family with their post-it notes and Sharpies, and we worked on improving kind of the processes in the family, and it actually really worked. And so one of the guys from Calgary, Alberta, actually at the graduation said to me, Karl, I know you just said that in passing as an illustrative, statement, but I did it with my family, and it really, really is effective. So the whole point is this stuff, you can use it for designing products. You can use it for designing, I've done it with medical students designing, their office or the movement of a patient through a clinic, for example. Everything that you could possibly think of designing in some way, you can use using these methods. So that's really the foundation of my design model.
No, I think very interesting take on this, and I think I have followed a lot of people who have done the same, in terms that they think life has a lot of processes, systems, and how they can design the system better. Let's just say that for now, better, and that's what they try to use all of those skills that they have to do that. And I was recently talking to someone, and I think this really relates to me, because I was recently talking to someone, and I was talking that I'm trying to find a job, XYZ, and they were talking to me, how are you using your design skills to find a job?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, when I try to think of that, I don't think I am doing the best job here. And I think that's where I realized the power that there is. The power, obviously I have my own biases around it, but
Mm-hmm.
definitely there is a power to how you can design processes and systems within your life and different things that you are trying to do.
Right.
Yeah. So awesome. Let me kind of go forward towards what you're doing now. So obviously your recent work at Habits for a Better Life, you are focused on kind of behavioral change for global issues like climate change, food insecurity, and much, much more. How have you applied these design thinking methods to kind of create like a real world impact in these situations?
Yeah, we've used it through everything that we do. So I basically started off with having everybody that's part of the project read existing research, reading existing scientific research. Because a lot of the time we aren't aware of what science already tells us. So they would do that. They start to formulate hypotheses that they have with regard to climate change, for example. And then they would formulate research studies, whether it's surveys or interviews or observations. And each team would go off and do their own research. They would then come back and summarize that, and each team then put all their data into one core repository, and then we synthesized all those data, and both with the human and also with using generative AI, really to get, we had a mountain of data. We had 300 people doing this, right? And then once we got that synthesis, now we wanted to get into basically using the design thinking methods. So we did the observation. Now we're going to do the sort of the reflection. And so we basically had each of them go through and identify the key insights from the research that we would need to address with regard to a new idea. We would then ideate, and using the ways that I always do, at least the subset of it for ideating with regard to design thinking. And then basically voting on which of these ideas are going to be the most impactful and which ones are the most aligned with the attributes that my partner in this project, Carly Williams, and I stated right at the beginning of the project. We wanted everything to be positive. So rather than, guilting you into, you should be doing this for the environment or whatever, I said, well, no, make it something that's going to be beneficial to me, and then also to the environment. So we also vote on the basis of that. Then we have within a team the insights that are the most effective, right? The most impactful, the most aligned. And then we do a storyboard on the basis of that and factoring in, addressing everything that we learned from the research. And then when we have that storyboard, we also do my favorite method, which is the pre-mortem, which is, and by the way, I love doing this with startups because startups will have done their work for, I don't know, some number of months, and it's all positive. The world needs this, and then you basically ask them to imagine that it's 6 months to a year in the future, and it's been an utter failure, absolute disaster. right? And then you say, okay, now imagine that failure. And now think about how you could prevent that failure and mitigate basically that failure, and then fix your storyboard or your design basically to do that. So we do that for every individual team. And we've now got some 20 teams, and then bring all the teams together in a big workshop. And these people are all over the globe, by the way, so we have to go do it just digitally. We bring them all together, and now we do voting on, again, the same criteria as I said before, and where we have the winning ideas. And we're building generative AI apps, basically bots. We're doing a documentary that we're putting together. We're also doing social media reels. We're also doing basically playbooks of guidance for various things. Whatever comes out of the research with this ideation is then being implemented. So that's kind of the way we're doing this work, and living it basically day to day, the way that everybody should. And I think it's often the case too when you talk about design thinking. Everybody thinks about, like I said before, that it's a workshop. No, it's a way of thinking, and you need to be doing it every day in terms of what it is you're doing. And that my other favorite thing to reinforce about design thinking is it won't make you a designer. I've heard people, and I think it's actually, we're doing a disservice. We've done a disservice to design by teaching so many people design thinking that they think that they're designers. No, they're design thinkers. They know how to think like a designer, but they don't have skills of a designer or a researcher, right? So I like to always reinforce that too. But no, we're using all the way through. So we're going to keep doing this project over time, but we will have deliverables as we go.
Very interesting. I think, first of all, I think thanks a lot for kind of picking up topics which are not kind of delved deeper into the real impact that the world needs at this point, I would say. And
Right.
also, I think it is really interesting to see how the processes kind of works in a really big team, even when they're kind of trying to create an impact. And I really liked how you kind of put together with the voting system, the views and opinions of technically everybody kind of comes together in a way, trying to work together for a bigger vision in the real world. So I think that's really, really interesting and kind of looking forward to. So segueing here towards your experience in the education
Mhm.
industry. So you kind of do lectures at McMaster University, and you have been doing in academia for a long while.
Mhm.
What do you think has is the biggest gaps in today's design education, and what do you think should the designers who are trying to learn to be a designer should focus beyond what's kind of taught in their classroom?
Great question, and one that Don Norman and I actually asked ourselves about 4 years ago when I was in San Diego, which is where he's based. And I was doing a whole year of focusing on working with design schools and design programs within universities. And we had already identified at IBM that there was a gap. That's why we needed to do our missing semester, 3-month boot camp, right? And Don also had a perspective on things that were missing. So he and I started the Future of Design Education Initiative. So it had some 680 volunteers that were part of it. And it also had a steering committee basically of half practitioners, half educators. And we had representatives from the global south. We had educators from design schools, design programs in universities, but also boot camps as well. And my desire was for the universities and design schools to learn from the boot camps, and the boot camps to learn from the universities, because I don't think that either one of them is doing a particularly great job with regard to design education. But the other one that we focused on was opening the aperture, basically, really, and not just think about that you're designing this one thing. What's the context that it's being designed in? And also think about the broader issues like sustainability, like ethics, and the like, and really digging into that. Some design schools are picking that kind of thing up now. But we put together a double issue of the ZG journal that basically summarized all of our curricular guidance that came out of all those groups. All of that started, by the way, literally the day that the society was shut down in North America due to COVID. And so we were supposed to have a face-to-face meeting in Austin, Texas, with all the people that were organizing this thing. And we kept saying the South by Southwest conference is still going, so maybe we should still go. And then literally like the night before, South by Southwest, West actually shut down too, and he said, okay, we're not doing this. So the entire thing was done remotely. It would have been better had we had an opportunity to be together in person. But the things that I think that often design education doesn't address, over and above even all of that, is one of the things that I mentioned before, is to think about impact. Think about speed, think about your direct relevance to and working with the other disciplines that you're working with. I make the point in my talks. There's one concept that I learned when I was doing clinical psychology, and I was working in a hospital, and my supervisor was having a conversation with me. I said, "Why don't we have more power here? Why do we have to always do whatever the rest of the hospital wants?" And his line was that psychology doesn't have a house in which to practice, and that the hospital is run by two powerful disciplines, right? Medicine and business, basically, and even more so in the US with regard to business. And when I think about what the large IT companies are like, it's the same thing there. Design is not a core discipline. Let's be honest with ourselves. It's really engineering is number one. Business is, arguably number two. And so even when you look at companies like Apple that used to have a chief design officer, they don't anymore, right? And so I think as a designer or a researcher, realizing that you're going to be a guest in somebody else's house, and that shouldn't be a negative. It's more of this is the approach that I need to take, that you can't be so arrogant as to assume that everything that you think needs to be done should be done. And so I think being more conscious of, the business that company that you're working for is running, and doing what you can to help them. So I think that's the biggest thing, is to open the aperture, realize that you need to fit within the broader community that you're working in. And you also you need to know some more about the other disciplines, probably even take some courses in engineering, take some or courses in business and like, just to be able to have the right language. I mean, that's the other thing I would mention. So whether you're graduating with an MBA, or you're graduating with an engineering degree, or you're graduating with a design degree, typically the first time that you ever deal with another discipline is when you're in your first job, which I think is horrible, right? People don't talk the same language. Design and engineering don't talk the same language. If you had some experience, let's say, my argument is always that universities should have a final year capstone project that should be multidisciplinary. And I've tried to set that up successfully in some universities, where that is the final, course that you do. And that's going to simulate what you're going to do, working on a real problem, working with all the key other disciplines. And the times when I've done that kind of a course, the feedback I got from it was, wow, this is the most phenomenal, educational experience I've ever had, because all the rest of the time you spend time with your own discipline. So that's the other thing, that you as an individual, even if your school didn't provide that, you can seek it out, as well, by learning more about those other disciplines, maybe even being part of some challenges, some design challenges and the like, a variety of those that are around, where they just ask for volunteers. You get a ton of experience. And even my project, the Habits for a Better World project, there's people there that most of them are gainfully employed. A lot of them have to do meetings on the weekends or in evenings, for example, because they are working. Some other ones are not, or they're between jobs. And I always say to them, let me know what experience you want to get. Because and some say, I want to get more leadership experience. Fine. It's a volunteer project. You can do leadership and the like. And so go elsewhere, go to where you think you can get the experiences that you need. But broadly, the guidance is to open your aperture more than just working on the core discipline that you've been listening and learning.
Very amazing. I think that's what I've recently got from not just you. I think everybody who I have met who are at a much better place than people kind of look up to is now you cannot just be like, I just know design. You have to know a little bit of a lot of things to actually, obviously, I think it does have a lot of impact on the career. You can talk to people easily. You can do things which are going to be smoother to transition to other languages. You can be involved in other conversation which can actually help with your domain. And I think this is very underrated, and people feel, I just want to know this and that's it. Maybe I've seen that it works for engineering in a lot of cases, but even engineering, if you grow, you will see, if you get like at a much larger, like maybe a staff senior engineer, you need to know other domains as well, or else it's not easy to survive. You need to know how product people think, and how to deal with them. You need to know how to deal with designers. Similarly, designers need to understand from the get-go on how to kind of deal with all of that.
Yeah. The one that I would add to that is to know what your company creates. How does it make money? Even if you have the opportunity, spend some time on the support team, see what people say that are having problems with it. Work with the sales team if you can, even just to shadow them for a little bit. You'll get so much insight. I would say that the first, I don't know, 15 years of my career, I worked in labs working on products, and I didn't look at the whole ecosystem of how the company made money. It was when I was starting to work with, let's say, the sales team, when I realized that, some of the biggest deals are closed within the last hour in a year. um, and you think, why is that? And so you get this real sense of what is the client really saying, what is their challenge with what you're doing. And when I taught our salespeople basically a sales version of design thinking, they would go in to talk to a client, let's say. And my star pupil at this was this senior executive salesperson. And she actually drew a little empathy map on basically a clipboard that she brought with her to take notes. And she focused on the entire person, right? And tried to get a sense of, well, how are they doing? What are their biggest challenges? What's on their performance goals for the year? What will make them successful? What are the biggest challenges they have? If you have more of that knowledge, you can actually sell them solutions appropriate to the actual challenges that they have. And if you only talk about products and try to keep on just pushing, oh, I've got the best product for you, you might be missing some key element. So even as a designer, realizing that it's never as simple as you think. As a designer, I have to design this and then it'll sell itself, basically. No, what are the biggest challenges that sort of a sales, if your product is sold by a sales team, to be able to understand that, but also then, spend some time actually looking at the logs and basically how the website works in terms of if your product is sold entirely on a website, where are they going? Try to get that, basically instrumentation of the website to be able to figure out where are people actually going on the site? How much time are they spending there? Are they having a difficult time finding something because of this pattern of behavior you saw or whatever? So there's a real sense of just to try to go deep, really try to understand is really the point.
Very interesting. I think that's true. I think one of the insights that you shared about sales team trying to kind of make the biggest sales in the last hour, which is really true. And I think I have been fortunate enough to work at a startup where I've seen this. It's because it's small. I think you get to mingle a lot with
Yes.
everything, and you get to see everything. And I've seen that at the end of the month, they stay really, really late, try to close every call that they can and achieve their target. It is really interesting to see other domains work this way. It is just, as I said, it's just interesting. And I think one thing I would say is that I personally love startups just because of this, that you get to kind of interact with other people. And that actually helps me as a designer, at least, to see how the company is doing. And maybe, I don't know, in my mind, and somehow I'm just more involved and I just really want to make it work. Whatever I'm doing, I really want to see that impact as well. I know
I
it's
love what you
maybe,
said.
yeah.
No, I love what you said, and I think that everybody should have that experience of like a startup. I think the guy that used to run the incubator at Google would tell people who said that right after school they'd want to do a startup, and he'd always say his advice was get a job first, get some experience in a large company, and then you can actually also be more effective at a startup as well. I strongly believe in that as well. But even people that are working in very large companies, they should do wherever they can get the experience, what you described in terms of working with a startup as well, even if it's a voluntary type thing.
No, I think I totally agree with this. I think another thing I've realized with these varied experiences, you learn different things. I know there's particular things like you work at different industries, you get different insights, how it works and everything. But I think even with working with different size of organization, there are different things that you learn, and that is really interesting to see how it all kind of works around. I do have one quick question,
Mhm.
because we talked about sales and everything. Do you think like designers are generally or can make great salesperson?
I think designers, like a full stack designer, if you will, somebody that knows more than just using Figma. You know what I mean? Somebody that really knows how to design properly. I think have the skills for any number of roles. And one that I talk about a lot is having designers and researchers become product managers, for example. There's a significant overlap, and there really aren't very many programs where that you go to become a product manager. So if a designer researcher picks up some more business skills and the like, they can be phenomenal product managers. I've had 4, 5 people now in my career recently that flipped between product management and research, actually, and vice versa. And we're just way more effective as a result. But I think it's actually really effective to have experience in all of those. We had a program, I don't know if we still do it at IBM, but in the services part of IBM, when you came in, as a new hire, you would, I think it's for like 2 years, you would go through different business units. And, some of it would be selling, some of it would be, technology based and the like. But you get a feel for, and those parts of the company would get a feel for that particular employee as well. And I thought that was a brilliant way of doing it. So rather than, you just get hired in and now you're in this one slot forever, I think it's really beneficial if you can get more broad experiences like that as well.
I totally agree. And I think I think that's what I see people as designers. I think it is just interesting to learn about different domains. And definitely, obviously, it's addition, not a subtraction with what you know. Uh, I think now I want to segue to the future. So
Mhm.
with AI coming in and kind of reshaping how world works, let's just say, what do you think as UX designers, how they should kind of prepare for this wave of change?
I think they should be using AI every day if they're allowed to. I know that at IBM, when I was working there, we could never use anybody else's AI. We'd always have to use our own because there is a challenge of the other AIs like ChatGPT and OpenAI. You could be using confidential material. You could be disclosing confidential material of your own. You could also be using somebody else's IP because the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, famously said, "There's no way that anybody could guarantee that a generative AI system could not use and include intellectual property from somebody else." But you look at IBM, and they do that very thing. They guarantee, they actually indemnify clients to say that we will be with you if you do find that you're in some intellectual property, challenge or whatever. So you have to use the generative AI tools that you're allowed to use. And of course, many of the design and research tools now have generative AI built into them anyway. My teams use DScout, for example, and DScout has also been amazing. They provide their tools for free for my Habits for a Better World project. But they are doing a great job of incorporating generative AI. But think about it. There was a talk I gave in Beijing that talked about kind of the way to approach the incorporation of AI in your workflow, and both the workflow for the product you're designing and also for you and your own workflow for as a designer or as a researcher. And I went through, it's available online in terms of what I covered, but basically saying that you should lay out all the tasks that you need to go do. You need to evaluate whether the task, let's say you're looking at your own productivity, let's say, and we did that in my last year or so at IBM. I had somebody working, Carlos Rosenberg was his name, who led my whole generative AI work with regard to research. And we went through and said, okay, of all the use cases that researchers could use AI for, let's evaluate them. First of all, is it something that a researcher really loves doing, already? And there's also real skill that's required for it. Okay, well, don't make that your first priority in terms of what you're doing. You want to keep people employed too, quite frankly. But then you want to also look at, well, what are the kind of things that take a lot of time, but are also not very high on the enjoyment curve for researchers, and that's things like taking an interview transcript, and basically synthesizing it, right? Well, that's a great candidate then, and that's what we ended up, working on. The other one was to be able to use an example of just like you do with your usual asking of a ChatGPT question about anything. We actually built one just for UX research knowledge. So if it was a relatively, inexperienced researcher that was going to do something, and they wanted to ask what sample size should we really have for this study or whatever, boom, they could get the answer from this one. And I give another example in this talk about, I do a podcast just like you do, and there are parts of the tasks that you could do as a podcaster that are able to be done with AI really effectively, right? Like the transcripts that you can generate after this sort of interview. But I don't know if the platform that you're using, the Talk Studio, does this, but Riverside is what I use, and it has all my voice samples from my 17 years of doing my podcast, and I don't actually need to be there. I could actually just write out a podcast, and it'll, in my voice, and I've done it, in my voice, it'll actually do it. I don't want it to do that. I want to still be there and the like. But that's another example of one of these things where you think, well, wait a minute, that's going too far. I don't think that's appropriate. And it's worth mentioning that right now, I think there's some dangerous things to watch out for. So the whole area of synthetic users, I think, is really problematic in the sense that the sales talk that some of them have to, let's say, CEOs of small companies or mid-sized companies is like, you don't have to hire researchers. You can just use this generative AI solution for these, get you the right information. And when they do a demo, it looks pretty impressive, what they come up with. But what I say typically to those executives that are making that decision, now ask it about a persona that like, for example, your job, and then see whether it's accurate. It's generally not accurate. They only are impressed because it's a user they don't know very well. Now, we can still use that technology. Again, one of the last things that I did at IBM was we had 1,300 studies we'd done, and we fed those all into a large language model. And now it's not synthetic users. Now you can actually query the database that we have of real users that actually did this stuff. So there are ways to make this stuff more effective, but the bottom line and the most important thing is you got to be using this stuff, and you got to know its limitations. You need to know what you can do with it, what you shouldn't do with it, what's ethical, what's not ethical to do with these tools. But the favorite thing that many people say is that, is AI going to take your job? It may take the job of somebody who doesn't use AI, but in all likelihood, it won't take the jobs of somebody that's already using AI effectively.
No, I think I really agree with what you just said. I think when you were talking about the Riverside, I was like, is this an AI character or not? But I think it is really interesting how people are using AI, and definitely what you said, there are multiple ways to use it. I still remember even when just ChatGPT, I think 3 years back when it just came out, and everybody had this question: is AI gonna replace the job? And I think one thing I did remember, I was speaking at a particular event back in India, and somebody asked me, "Is AI going to replace my job?" I was like, "AI might not, but somebody who is using
Right.
definitely can, because they may have." As we remember, as we said early, as you said earlier, that if you want to do something fast, you need to understand that there are a lot of prosthetics that you can use now, and AI is definitely one of them that is easier available nowadays. And I think somebody needs to realize business wants to, nowadays unfortunately business are at places where they want things fast, revenue generated, like they want business to grow, and if your design can do that faster, they would prefer a designer who can do faster however they do it, and if that allows, obviously, rather than a designer who is going to do it other way. So i think I think that is what is really important, and what I kind of got from that. Very interesting to see.
Yeah, and I think they also, in doing it and using it a lot, you'll get a sense of some of the best practices. Like one of the things that I do is Always ask it if it doesn't come up with references or sources. Ask that. I typically, if I'm really going to rely on something I've gotten, I go back and double check it. And so there's a lot you can do to harden it. I mean, my first question that I asked ChatGPT 3.0 a few years ago, I test any of them. DeepSeek I tested with this as well. I basically ask it, tell me about Karel Vredenburg, because it's something I know very well, right? What's accurate, what's not. And I also asked it about my brother, and ChatGPT 3.0 actually said it was a really, really effective description of the bio of my brothers, and except for one detail, it was all in the past tense. It was like he was dead. I was like, "You're not dead. He still runs marathons. What the hell's going on here?" Strangely, it said that I was retired, which at the time I wasn't. So I don't know if it's prescient here, but no, I think it still makes, if you know how it works, you know that it is still going to come up with errors, and so you still need to be vigilant in what it is that you use from it.
Very interesting. I think that is really interesting to see. I've seen this, that a lot of people get their bios in past tense. A lot of people get some things which they have never even done, and they are like told that they have done it. And like, so that's really interesting to see. Awesome. So I do want to kind of summarize whatever we have talked about in this
Mhm.
one question here. So obviously you have mentored, worked with thousands and thousands of designers all across your career. What's the one piece of advice you always give to a designer who's who's kind of looking to break into the design industry?
It's actually one of the things that you had mentioned as well, and that I talked about it in my talk at the Blend conference as well, that your resume or your portfolio should be the best pieces of design you've ever done. It's there to represent you, just like products are there to represent your work in the world. Same thing with resumes and portfolios. So you need to make sure that you're appropriately tailoring them to the role. I still see a lot of people just take one resume and portfolio and blast it everywhere. The more places you could send your resume or portfolio to, the better, they say. No, instead, choose a smaller number of organizations, but looks and really read carefully what's there. Like back when I was at IBM, I hired 64 researchers in the last year that I was there, and 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 I'm very conversational, and I respond to everybody on LinkedIn, for example. I learned that not everybody does that. Certainly not vice presidents. So, but I did a lot of the time, and people would write to me and say, would I be a reference for them? Because they had heard that somebody inside the company, if somebody inside the company prefers you, then you increase your chances of getting a job. And I'd say, well, yeah, but I'm the one that is hiring you, number one. And, it's just not the way it works. And so I wrote a blog post that's on my website, karelvredenburg.com, that is guidance and advice from an executive of a hiring organization in terms of what you should do, the do's and don'ts of actually, getting a job. And so one of them was to very carefully read the job posting. If the job posting doesn't mention or is very explicit and says that it's in person, that remote is just not on, don't even apply. And say, well, I wanted to see if there was a shot at it. At IBM, for example, there are hard and fast rules for having to be in the city that you're supposed to be in, and then coming to the office or the studio 3 days a week. Well, that's non-negotiable, right? So don't waste your own time applying to roles that you don't have a shot at getting. You'll just get more depressed yourself. Say, "Oh, I just applied to 50 jobs." Well, you shouldn't. A lot of them you weren't appropriate for, or the job wasn't relevant. And number one, and number two, you got to make sure that you tailor your application for the particular role. And back to my main point, make sure that you're designing it in the absolute best way you can. Also, to differentiate yourself, just like a product has to differentiate itself in the market compared to competitors, if you're applying for jobs right now, design and research jobs, you've got a lot of competition, right? So think of how it is that you're going to be differentiated. I do for fee coaching, but like on one-on-one. But also for the Habits for a Better World project, I want to give back to the volunteers that have volunteered for that. And so I every about 3 weeks or so, I do a free online group coaching session. And so there's about 10 to 15 people that would show up. And we talk there about too, a lot of the time there's and not only from there, even the ones that I'm my paid coaching, people often have things in their resume or portfolio that probably everybody says or everybody has. You're not differentiating yourself. What is it that you have that is really truly unique? Is there something that inspired you to go into design and research that you should probably mention, right? Because it's something that could differentiate you. So think about how your product, you, can be differentiated in getting the job.
Very, very interesting. I think one thing, it really definitely related to me because I'm in the job search market and I'm trying
Mhm,
to figure out how do I differentiate. And uh, so I've seen this, that I know I do this podcast, and we talked about it, that I don't make any money from it. I do kind of invest in it uh, a lot more. Uh, and a lot of people, whenever I tell them, even my friends, whenever I tell them I do this, and I put a lot of time in it, like
mhm.
I put a lot of time reaching out to people, talking, uh, setting up the calls, research, like everything. And people say, you are searching for a job and you're putting this much effort and you're not getting any direct impact, right? But I'm like, uh, I'm doing it first because I love it. Second, I'm doing this because I want to be recognized for something, and I just love doing it. And third thing, I know I'm not doing it for a direct impact, but I'm hoping in the long term it pays me off. But even if it doesn't, I'll still be happy because I got to meet with people who I would it would have been very difficult to have like a 1 hour conversation with them any other way, right? Uh, a lot of time I do lose kind of a self confidence in me. A lot of time people say this, but I do kind of come back to this place that I love doing it. This is my personality. And
Mhm.
when somebody asks me, how are you unique? I'm like, I love creating content, talking to people, socializing in this space. Uh, and that's what who I am. So, yeah.
That's spot on. I want to congratulate you for that because I think that is differentiating, number one. And I think you're also going to learn a lot. Like you just said, you're talking to a whole lot of people that you might not have had the opportunity to spend this much time with, for example. Having done a podcast, my Life Habits podcast, for the last 17 years, 17 and a half, I think it is now. And it is rewarding though, like you're saying, right? There was a time when I was in like the top 10 of self-help at one point. Everybody else was it was their job to do that, but I purposely didn't want to make it my job. I wanted to make it my passion, which it was. And but you meet people all over the place. So and this, you've got a good following on this podcast now, and people are going to know about you. And so you're enjoying doing it, number one. Number two, you're making connections, even with like me, for example. You also are learning things in all these conversations with people. And, lastly, you're also getting your name out there, and a lot of other people being able to talk about and saying, well, actually, you know what, just, you can, rather than even interviewing you, they can just listen to you because you're out there in the world with this podcast. So I just think it's awesome that you're doing this.
Thanks a lot. I think I really appreciate it. I think, as I said, I just love doing it. I don't, as of now, I don't care about the impact or anything. I think for me, the impact is I just got an hour to talk to amazing people, in different industries, different scope. And as I said, like I just get to learn a lot. And I think this is priceless. I feel,
Mhm. Mhm.
this is priceless because, as I said, like in the long term, it just makes me happy, and I don't know. There's no word for it, but I just feel like I'm happy doing it. Uh,
There's
so
also a
that's
real
really good.
reach. So I would also just mention that it's a reach. I would come up to we met at a conference. I would have people come up to me afterwards at some conference somewhere in the world. I think it was Sydney, Australia at the time. I was presenting there. Somebody came up to me and said, "Now I know where I've heard your voice before." Like while I was talking, it's a different talking voice that you typically use when you're presenting like a keynote. And uh, my spoken voice and my podcast, I try to be really relaxed in it because I'm imagining I'm only speaking to one person, for example, and so I spend a lot of time trying to think about how I want to position it. But the point is that I quite regularly get people coming up to me and saying, by the way, I listened to your podcast. I really love it. So in your position of still, starting your career and wanting to, make a lot of connections, you're touching a whole lot of people and a whole lot of people that you don't even know, right? They're just watching it, listening to it. But that is also likely going to be, paying off for not only the enjoyment you get for it, but also getting a job.
Yeah, I hopefully that works out fine. But awesome. So I do have like a last fun section for
Yep,
you. So I do want to do a rapid fire round with like
these are fun.
maybe a few 4 or 5 things I just want
Yeah,
to ask.
sure.
So okay, so the first thing I want to ask, what's the best designed product that you have ever used?
Probably the pen.
Mm.
And I don't think we've quite improved upon it just yet. I guess maybe the stylus on an iPad, but uh, I just always think that it was interesting that the CEO um, of Intuit said that that was the competition that the team had. They needed to be better than the pen and a checkbook at the time, and that was a big challenge at the time because the pen was really portable. Products at computers at the time were not. So anyway, it's thinking about what might be the best instantiation and the like as well. I probably have many other ones, but that's one that I like to use as being more provocative.
No, definitely makes sense. What what would you say is the one book every designer should read?
It's one that I should have read a long time ago, but I just read recently, and it's called Unreasonable Hospitality, and it's by Will uh, Guidara. So Will and then Guidara rather. And the subtitle is The Remarkable Power of Giving People More Than They Expect. It's all about a an owner of a restaurant, a high-end restaurant that's trying to go for being the top restaurant in the world. And they're just looking at, he talks about that restaurants typically to get to Michelin ratings and stuff like that, it was almost always just the quality of the food, right? And he really wanted to bring in hospitality, that how you were treated. And that's what he made his specialization. So it was really high quality food, but also really amazing hospitality. Just wonderful stories in here. But it makes you think as a designer, thinks the stuff that I said earlier, open the aperture up a bit. What can you do to really make your product be outstanding in terms of the experience that it provides?
Very interesting. Awesome. Definitely, I think I would give it a read. Third, the what would you say is the biggest UX myth you wish would disappear?
That you only need to use tools to do design. That you just got to learn, and that's what a lot of the boot camps do. They're going to teach you how to do use Figma, for example, and it's like, no, that's a mechanism. That's the brush for doing your artwork or whatever. You still need to actually learn how to create good design. So I think that's the biggest myth.
Very interesting take. Okay, so I will do the last one here. No, actually, the second last. What would you say is the most underrated skill in UX?
I think it's probably listening. And I think that a lot of the time people don't do it enough. One of the things that I love doing when I've got a group is I talk about the pregnant pause, which is essentially this. Doesn't that feel uncomfortable, right? Getting good at conversation, getting good at talking to somebody and trying to get information from them, listening and not talking. There's an exercise that I do with senior executives because most of them don't listen. They talk all the time, and their staff reinforces the fact that they're brilliant and the like. Well, no, I get them to, and I've got a podcast episode on this, authentic listening, I call it. And people that have written to me afterwards and said, you know what, that's the most powerful episode you've got. Everything from you saved my marriage to I actually have really, really talented staff. I didn't know that because I'm always the one that's talking, sort of thing. So if you want to understand what you need to be building and designing, listening is critical.
I think definitely something that is very underrated. Okay, last one. If you weren't in UX, what career would you have pursued?
Probably the one that I was hijacked from when I went into UX. I was basically an academic, and I was basically in cognitive science and clinical psychology, and I basically was a therapist at the time. And I still, now that I'm retired, I'm getting back into a lot of writing. I'm also writing my second book now, and I just think that I don't think there's any limit to what you can do as a professional, especially if you've been in design, because I think that we're all very ambidextrous, as we talked about earlier. There's a whole lot of different skills that you have. You can really dig into each of them. So I'm enjoying doing more of that in both the project, the Habits for a Better World project. I get this amazing team that I get to work with, this amazing partner in Carly Williams, who's a phenomenally talented filmmaker. I'm thoroughly enjoying that. I'm writing blog posts. I just wrote one looking at the research that's done on trying to understand how people that lean more toward being conservative to being compared to being more liberal, what differences are there? Turns out there's brain structure differences. There's it's fascinating stuff that, yes, your social environment also influences a lot of this, but people that where you're blown away that how could they possibly see this situation in the way that they're describing it, right? When you see it totally differently. A lot of that is down to how we're made, how we're built. And so I basically come across stuff now and want to research it deeply, So
Very interesting. I think really interesting take. And I think one thing I definitely got from the last point is that now you're becoming more curious about stuff in different domains. And I think that is really interesting to see. Awesome. Thanks a lot. And I think this podcast has been one of the best ones that I've done. I know it is a little bigger as well, and I think we have got a bunch of insights. And obviously, it is bigger because you have like a 4-decade long experience to kind of share and knowledge to kind of share. Uh, Again, thanks a lot for kind of taking out the time, coming on the podcast, sharing your insight. I think it has been really wonderful. I know you have shared a lot of resources in between. I'll try to link as much as I can in the description, and obviously your LinkedIn as well if somebody wants to reach out. Again, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast again.
thank you. And all the best in your career journey. And congrats on being an awesome host of this podcast series. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much.